Survivor Specialist John and McKenna are back. We have fancy new thumbnails, we have fancy new backgrounds, and we are excited for 46. And we're back doing the rewind. John, how excited are you for 46?
After this week's premiere, I'm super excited. This cast seems like a lot of fun. And I wasn't high on this cast going into it. I wasn't really feeling a lot of them, but a lot of them just like brought it in this premiere and has made me really excited for what this season's going to go.
Yes. So, everyone who has watched our rewinds before, we are once again restructuring our rewind this season, and we are going with themes of Outwit, Outplay, and Outlast. We are picking our Outwit, Outplay, and Outlast moments of the episode, and then finding past seasons to relate that moment to. John, did I make that make sense?
Yeah, the big thing that's changing from what rewinds you might have watched in the past, those ones we kind of went through and listed off similar instances. This case, like what we're going to try to do this season, be a little more conversational about these moments, relate them to like big moments in the episode that really stand out as these pinnacles of Survivor that we're told every season at Final Tribal Council, just throughout the season. You know, it's those 3 O's we talk about all the time. And hopefully it makes it a little more engaging for you. It gets a little bit of competition between McKenna and I, which
we love.
We always love. Yeah, and that's just what it comes down to, is I need an excuse to have people agree with me over McKenna every week.
See, that's where you're wrong, and you'll just like keep feeling lower and lower because everyone will love my opinions more. So let's get into Outwit. Our Outwit moment of the episode is Q questioning Jelinski and how long he might last in the game, and just because he quit so many times. So that whole, conundrum that Q felt of, wait, is this a good ally for me or not? Because, when the going gets tough, is he going to just fold or is he going to persevere?
Yeah, the Outwit portion of this podcast now is really going to focus on more strategic decisions that are made throughout the episode. Mm-hmm. So in this case, we're talking about the questioning of Jelinski's convictions. How dedicated is he to this game? And ensuring that himself and his allies can work together and not just fold and flip-flop. And that's the hard thing here, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So that leads perfectly into my relation, and that is Cochrane in South Pacific. I have just recently rewatched South Pacific, and this Cochrane moment of flipping on the old Savai'i tribe and going with Upolu is kind of like what Q is questioning about Jelinski. Like, if it comes down to a tiebreaker where you have to go to rocks, is he going to go to rocks for me? Or is he just going to fold and vote the other way? So I wanted to highlight Cochrane here and this flip because it changed the game. So had Jelinski stayed in the game, could he have done something like this to Q? Who knows?
Yeah, I think it's an apt comparison, and it's one that's further along in the game, which makes it a little interesting when we're talking about it in conjunction with the premiere of Survivor 46. Myself, my moment, I decided to go a little more early in a season. I decided to go with another premiere, and I want to look at So Kim in Worlds Apart. And though she isn't giving up like Jelinski, I think what she really does is shows that she's not really willing to completely commit to a lie in a way that it's believable, and instead comes up with these little tiny moments that make it so that her allies just question whether or not she's reliable in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, the medium option is really, like, something I think people struggled with a lot, and I don't think was a great thing to say, though also Jelinski telling the truth of, "Yeah, I completely, like, folded, let them get extra votes," was also not a great option to say either. So, like, it's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't,
Mhm.
with lying and telling the truth. I think there has to that you have to ride that fine line.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. But before we start diving into these Outwit moments, if you're listening, thank you. Make sure you like and subscribe to the video. It really helps the channel out a lot, and it helps McKenna and I out a lot, and tells
Yeah.
us that you're enjoying what we're putting out here. So let's start with the moment in 46 here, McKenna,
Mhm.
when Q actually gives us the confessional of no, I don't trust Jelinski. How are you reacting to that? And how are you like analyzing what he's saying versus Jelinski's actions that were being seen in the edit?
It's interesting because, like, I agree with Jelinski being like, it would take several hours to do that, and it's kind of like I feel like impossible. Unless you're thinking of things like, "How do I plug the holes with my shirt, my buff, my" like, you should, probably try and think of those options, but just pail and giant ass barrel, I I have a hard time seeing how it's possible. So, like, I don't fault him for bailing on that one, but I think Jelinski did get reamed a little hard.
It was a very interesting conversation that we had on that tribe as opposed to the Savvy tribe who weren't able to complete it. And I think it's the
Mhm.
difference in the Savvy tribe running out of time
Yeah.
and and this tribe just not being able to finish and deciding, you know what, we're giving up quite early into the challenge based on what Q said about the challenge, based kind of like where the
Mhm.
sands in the hourglass were when this happened. They weren't even halfway there. And I think the most damning thing for Jelinski in this episode is he's the one who stood up and said, I'll do this. I
Yeah.
am going, you know what? I'm going to beast it out for everyone. I'm going to do this. And then it just seems like he bit off more than he could chew, and he didn't understand how physically grueling this would be.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I think also, we can relate it back to the Cochrane moment that I mentioned of, like, people are ripping
Mm-hmm.
Jelinski up, and it's just like Cochrane was also ripped apart. So, like, who knows if Jelinski lasted a little bit longer in the game if they keep, like, dogging him, that if he does stick with them, or if that quote unquote alliance or good deed that he did for the other two people on their journey could actually help him moving forward.
Yeah, it's an interesting question because obviously, like, it's just a thought experiment at this point, right?
Oh yeah.
But But I'm glad you brought up the journey because that's the other side of this entire thing is Jelinski prioritized advantage over tribe, and
Mhm.
he prioritized it in the worst possible way where he get and Jess brings it up in tribal council. He gave them extra votes, and there's no guarantee that they won't just use those extra votes to vote any of them off by the time a swap or a merge happens.
Yeah, exactly. I do feel though that journey is one of those, damned if you do, damned if you don't situations, because, like, if he pulls out the best manipulative lie that you could ever see, well, now that he just showed his cards and they're never going to trust him again. But ag- they aren't on his tribe, but that could work against him later on in the game. So I don't know what the move is here.
I mean, we've seen a lot of these journeys at this point over the last 6 seasons of Survivor.
Mhm.
This might be one of the worst.
Yes.
This
Yeah.
game like, I understand it. It's like, oh, you're playing each other. You're like having to reveal how good you are at lying, how good you are at social deduction, those type of things. But the fact that someone's losing a vote and people are gaining extra votes, it's just such an imbalance when it comes to an
Yeah.
advantage. And like you said, Jelinski's kind of in this lose-lose situation here. And unfortunately, the big part of his game that didn't work out was when he decided to tell the entire truth when he went back to his tribe.
Yeah, I think also he could have just played up like saying, no, being really unconvincing, like, no, I have the paper, I have the vote. No, I have it. No, like he still didn't have to fold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. But let's switch the conversation over to the Q side of this decision here, and not just like what Jelinski's doing, but Q at this point, from what we were told, is in a 4-person alliance, which is a majority on his tribe of 6, with Jelinski, Q, Kenzie, and Tiffany. And at that point, like, we're at the very beginning of this, and he's already like, no, we're already turning on our alliance. It doesn't matter. How do we evaluate that from the strategic standpoint of things?
If you can't trust your alliance, are they really your alliance? That's also a way to look at it, but you also want to keep the tribe strong, right? So if Jelinski's not doing anything in challenges, you want to get rid of that. And he's not doing anything for you socially, get rid of that. Like, he's not doing anything for you to help progress your game, and he's been proven to fold under pressure. So to avoid a future Cochrane, Cochrane was the weakest on their tribe. He was doing like all of these. He wasn't just being a strong ally at the time. And so they didn't get rid of him. They chose, let's do other things so other people don't have more power while then destroying their own game later on.
Yeah, I think there's also a really important strategic element of this, where when you have a 4-person alliance, because it's a majority on a 6-person tribe, a 3-person alliance is still a majority on a 5-person tribe. So sacrificing that initial number isn't as detrimental as some people might think it is.
Yeah.
And that is a big part of the conversation that we see in Worlds Apart, where we have Tyler and Max kind of in the middle of 2 sides, with the Joaquin and So side, and then the Shirin and Carolyn side. And that is... It's that decision where it's like, okay, if we get rid of one of our numbers, we still have this opportunity to control this tribe just based on the way simple math works.
Yeah, exactly. And who knows what the other 2 could do to help further your game anyway. Like, you don't know how Banu can actually maybe be your 4th that you didn't realize, or Jess could be that 4th that you didn't know could be there if you hadn't gotten rid of Jelinski.
Okay, McKenna, walk us through the South Pacific situation with Cochrane and how it parallels the strategic decisions going on here in this premiere.
I just think that had they thought like Q, being like, we got to get rid of Jelinski, being like, we got to get rid of Cochrane, and actually stuck to that, then we might see a Savai winner, because Christine is coming back from redemption, and she's not going back to Apollo. She is so strongly against Coach that Savai will have an easy number on their side that they can easily vote out, like they did, like Apollo did with Cochrane. I think this Cochrane vote is what Jelinski could have been had to the Purple Tribe had he lasted longer. It's almost like a looking to the future.
Right. It's that speculation of like the possibilities that a player like Jelinski brings to the game.
Because he's a student of the game, as is Cochran. Like he is as much of a super fan, so he's going to be thinking of strategy. Well, Cochran was also doing the same, so he's not just going to be one of these people that can just like lump along for a vote. He has a brain and is trying to like maybe cause chaos. So I think Q did well in his decision here to avoid that future maybe Savai destruction.
Right. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. I kind of want to focus on the dogging of Jelinski here by the tribe when he comes back from the journey, because I think that is
and at tribal council.
But at tribal council he's already going, right? Like they
No, I know, but I'm just saying, like, he's being dogged in both scenarios. Like, had he lasted, like, this is now 2 areas where he's just been trashed.
It's very similar to what happens to Cochran in South Pacific. He's kind of being Jelinski and Cochran aren't great, like perfect comparables, because Jelinski brings a little more physicality than Cochran does.
I don't know. He really
he gave up. He sure gave up. But the big thing is Cochran got a lot of flack just for like being the weak person on Savai, and got more flack after he flipped.
With scrambly and squirrely.
Yeah. And the response to Cochran flipping just drove him further and further into the arms of Coach.
Exactly.
So it's really weird to see from a strategic standpoint, and I know this kind of gets more into the social game than the strategic game here, but that this late in Survivor, I mean, literally twice as far into Survivor from South Pacific, we still have people playing the game like this where they can just, dog someone a bit too much, and it can drive them to thinking things. We don't see it from Jelinski because he doesn't get the opportunity at all. He's also just dead in the water because he doesn't have a shot in the dark here. It's very easy for them just to like lay all the votes on him, especially once Tiffany knows
the only
that,
person to play Survivor and never vote.
Yeah. It's wow, is that true?
I mean, yeah. Everyone has voted in Survivor at least one time.
Yeah, I guess so. Wow. That's you know what? It's okay. I'm glad Jelinski has a legacy attached to him. But I want to talk about So.
Yeah. Break that down for us.
So the big thing with So, and I think the big comparison it comes down to is the approach of talking to the tribe after going on a journey. Because, like, let's be real. These beginnings of seasons that we kind of got in that span between, like, I guess Token Sheens was kind of like the first time it happened, and it's like spattered around through the 20s of people going to beaches prior to the rest of the tribe arriving and having to make this decision of whether or not they benefit the tribe or they like, get an advantage and benefit themselves. It's the approach you take in talking to the rest of your tribe afterwards, because they're already not going to trust you, especially that late into the game where it's happened several times before, because they assume you have an advantage. So
yeah, I mean, that's basically like the journey, like those go ahead of the tribe kind of situations are pretty much the journey, except like you're deciding a bit more rather than a vote.
Yeah, and like it's not as open because you're usually in previous seasons prior to Worlds Apart, it was done with one person, right? Worlds Apart is kind of like that anomaly where they send 2 people instead on this journey, which changes things a little bit and the dynamic of it all. But in this case, it's more, it parallels the journey a lot more because there are people there to corroborate your story eventually. And the problem is So decides, hey, we're going to do the selfish thing here. But we're going to tell them we take the medium option. And this is the strategy involved with saying, hey.
Why is it the medium? Well, like, why don't you take the good option? Like, I just Sorry, continue. It just is
I agree, because
This one is maddening.
you could let it, like, you could get it off, or say like, hey, I had to choose between extra food and, like, nails or something like that. Right?
Mhm.
Like be a little more creative with it. So comes up with the worst possible lie, and because of it, it immediately sows distrust within her tribe. And I mean, if you look at So Kim and you just get a sense of how she is as a person, she doesn't scream your typical first boot in Survivor.
Debatable. I like early boot.
Yeah,
I'd
I think an early boot's fine, but she doesn't scream. Like, if you're looking at the entire length of first boots in Survivor, So's kind of an anomaly there,
yeah.
if you don't consider like her social game, right?
Mm.
And that's really what it comes down to, is you see her strategic and social approach here, and it's just bad. It's bad. And because of that, like, her and Joaquin have to essentially pair off immediately because they made this decision together. So
Yep.
they're already tied together. And you have this group in the middle you're really vying for with Tyler and Max.
Mhm.
And because of So's horrible lying, like, Shirin calls her out on it right away, essentially. And because of that, no one can trust her. And despite the fact that it probably made a lot more sense for Max and Tyler to go with Joaquin and So, they decide to go with Carolyn and Shirin instead, because So's just not trustworthy enough to keep around.
Yeah, exactly. I agree.
Anything you want to add to the So discussion?
No, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head, being like, I think that just that one decision can change the outlook on your entire game. I think had he not given up on the sweat task, or had he not, folded in the journey, like, some of these things could have been more forgiven. And it's just the compounded aspect of, all of these things that he did throughout the episode.
When it comes for, like, Jelinski was a fantastic character. I loved seeing him in this episode, but his age really showed.
Yeah.
And that's the interesting thing. And I think that's where, again, like, the Cochran situation of it all, you get a lot of that because of just his disassociation from the rest of his tribe, because of, just who he is as a person. I think
Yeah.
So kind of has that too, where she's just really out of her element. And because of that, doesn't quite know how to properly interact, while thinking like more of like that white collar mindset of, oh no, we have to game the system a little. And that's ultimately what leads to all of their downfalls in these seasons.
All right, we are moving on to my favorite section. It is Outplay. We are dealing with any kind of like physical tasks. So that could have been, sweat savvy, the challenge, if there's a reward challenge, immunity challenge, what have you. But we are going with the highlight of the episode for me, the giant gecko, the largest gecko we have ever seen. I texted John right away. I was like, I don't care what you say, we're doing this moment.
That's fine, because I think this is a really good thing to compare to, because it really takes that, what we've seen in the new era of Survivor with these like first immunity challenges, the, hey, here's this grueling thing you have to move that's super heavy through this obstacle course before you solve a puzzle. Like, it is, if you put 18 people on a beach and said, hey, you're playing Survivor, they would assume this is the first challenge. But there's a giant gecko instead of like the boat that they have to move, or, it's usually the boat that they've been moving lately, and they have to move it under the net, right?
Yeah, I just love that he said gecko and not lizard. I like it was specifically a gecko, and it made me happy. It was so cute, and I like the opening challenge where it's team based. Like, you have to come together as a team, instead of, you can have people breaking off doing the puzzle like you have at the end of this challenge, but we'll get into your example, but it was a little bit separated. where people did one part of things and people did the other part of things. So I like that with this challenge and the gecko, it brought everyone together as a tribe to try and win immunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we look at this challenge in particular, a gecko, just like the layout of a gecko, doesn't make it very obvious how you're supposed to handle this 500-pound monstrosity that is like blocking your way.
Yeah, I mean, with the tail, the 4 legs, the giant head, the body, like it isn't as easy as, say, a dummy or a snake.
Yeah. So with that, McKenna, what is your outplay? Like, what are you connecting this outplay to?
Okay, I'm memeing this. We are going with Gulliver from Nicaragua. It was the sponsored reward where they get to go see Gulliver's Travels at the Survivor movie theater. And they had to transport this Gulliver dummy to the finish line. And I think they've done dummies several times, as early as Thailand.
Mhm.
And this one is just takes the cake because of the movie reference, because it is Gulliver's Travels. So there are a bunch of similarities with the actual challenge itself. Like they have to untie Gulliver from the ropes that he's been tied down to, and then pull him through this like obstacle thing where it's like really difficult to try and get him through. Now I think he's a little bit easier to deal with than this gecko because I think the weight is just lighter, but he does also have all of the limbs and things that the gecko adds as well.
Yeah, he was also 8 feet long in that, if I recall correctly.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, like that's long.
That's
And you have
insane.
to remember, it's also this challenge happens quite late into Nicaragua. In fact, this is probably one of the most reviled episodes of Survivor ever.
I don't know why I picked this because Nicaragua, after rewatching it, is still my least favorite season of. Wait, Thailand is up there, but anywho, both with dummies. Nicaragua is still my like just least favorite season, and that is one of the worst episodes in Survivor history. But I am mentioning it as my outplay, which is my favorite section. This is a lot. This is a lot, John.
For those listeners who don't remember what episode this is the double quit in Nicaragua episode.
Yes.
This is the episode where
Nayanka and Purple Kelly quit. Nayanka doesn't step down for the rice. She lets Holly do that, and she goes on the movie and takes the reward because, you know, I'm here too. I can do it, whatever, and then just quits. And I'm
yes, but we're not focusing on that. We're focusing on the physical element of this. And
Gulliver
yeah,
and his travels.
that's true. Personally, I think we have to talk about giant snake because you think, you know, there's a giant gecko, it's a reptile. Giant snake, pretty iconic in Survivor, though it hasn't been used as many times as one might think. So I'm going back to the first time we had a giant snake, and that is Survivor Game Changers.
Survivor Game Changers?
That's right, McKenna. When else could people possibly hear us talk about Survivor Game Changers?
It could possibly be over on the Patreon. We are talking the premiere of Survivor Game Changers. It is a 2-hour episode. We are watching Sierra get booted. We are watching Tony get booted. And it has the snake reference to this episode, as well as Tony kind of Jelinski is emulating Tony a little bit here in these few episodes. So we kind of have that crazy ally, and we have the snake.
We do. And the big thing with this, I think, is first off, I think this challenge in Game Changers was way harder than what they had to do in 46.
It's longer.
It is longer. It's comparable in weight. The gecko, like I said, was 500 pounds, and this snake was around 400 pounds. Although,
and they both had 6. They both had 6.
Yeah, 6 people, which is a good number. But they had to like drag this snake over the cage from in the ocean where you're not getting leverage to lift this thing up. Like, you're hauling this snake.
And it's
You
also
can't even
wet, which adds
Yes.
weight.
It's probably why
weight in
JT says
itself.
it was like 700 or 800 pounds.
Yeah, exactly.
But I just think it really compares, and I think there's a lot of strategy in how you tackle a challenge like this.
Mhm.
And
It's not what Varner was doing.
no, it's not what Varner was doing. Although, like, that's kind of similar to what some of the contestants at 46 were doing, because
And Jeff had to yell
Varner,
at them, "Don't do that."
yeah, well, it's also different when you can drag the thing and don't have to haul it over something.
Yeah, I mean, so in Game Changers, they were trying to bring it over the cage, and they're also trying to bring it over the wall in 46.
Mm.
But they're trying to bring it down by the head, and
Yeah.
Jeff is like, "No, you guys have to like lift it over." And so that's what we see Varner doing. Like, he just gets on the head of the snake and is just like, "It's not moving. I've got all my weight on it." And Caleb's like, "My arm is being crushed."
Yeah, absolutely. And because of that, it's just so different, because in water, it just takes a whole other element. I mean, we've seen so many seasons of Survivor where people like kind of freak out in the water and stuff.
Mhm.
And in 46, there's an advantage because everyone in the tribe has to do it, right? You get a good idea of everything. Like you had mentioned earlier, Game Changers is weird with this challenge because
Mhm.
3 people have to stay back in order to open the snake up and get the tiles so they can solve the combination lock, and then throw rings in order to hit the oars up to spell immunity, rather than doing a jigsaw puzzle like we saw in 46. But in 46, everyone did the lifting and everything, and then 2 people did the puzzle. In this, it's separated. And when you
Mhm.
look at the divisions that the Mana tribe has in this, and you see Michaela on the beach, it's weird. We get into it on the Patreon. You can
Yes,
really,
it
like,
should be live now, but
yes.
stay here. Wait till wait till after we're done talking here. Go over to the Patreon, listen to us talk the premiere of Game Changers.
With the Gulliver, like, in Nicaragua,
Mhm.
remind me what the rest of that challenge is. Like, it's just an obstacle course, right?
It's a muddy obstacle course, which is essentially what we have here in 46.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so interesting, because the Gulliver seems like it's a little more awkward than this gecko. There's a lot more heft to the gecko. I feel like Gulliver's arms were kind of like
It's very like
dangly.
it. I think yeah, the gecko definitely has a bit more structure to it, where Gulliver is a dummy. It is just like dead weight and floppy and moving all over the place.
Yeah, and they're doing it with less people, because I'm pretty sure it was the final 10 when they did that.
No, it was
Maybe
an odd
final 8.
number because
Odd number because
Dan
Dan set out. That's right.
Dan in his big chair.
That's right. Of course. So it must have been 9.
Mhm. And what I really like about I'm gonna give you the points here for
Ooh,
Outplay
you hear that? I'm getting the points.
I do think your example is the better one, because I also like the challenge itself better, where
Mhm.
I really like that they had to traverse a balance beam together. It
Yeah.
really lends it to the snake rather than the gecko. Like, you couldn't do that with a gecko because it's just like not as like easy.
Long.
Yeah. But I really like that balance beam aspect of it, where it wasn't just like running it to the beach.
One thing I really appreciate about the snake is, like, the placement of the snake mattered on, like, the tray.
Mhm.
And it's very similar, because I think one of the funniest shots from this premiere of 46 is the shot of them just having to get the gecko's head up and over the ledge, and then, like,
Yeah.
training it in.
Yeah, that, and then Jeff was said like, "It's upside down and backwards. They have to flip it over." And it's like, "Okay. Like,
Yeah.
we know?"
Jeff got really into this challenge. It was great.
Yes, exactly. Are we ready to move on to Outlast, John?
Yeah, let's move on to Outlast.
All right, what is our Outlast moment?
this one's a little... Outlast is kind of like the weird segment, because Outlast, we're primarily going to focus on the social game because that's really what gives people longevity in Survivor. It can also be like kind of a catch-all for, advantages and like moments that don't really
Where does
fit
this moment
into...
fit?
Yeah. Moments that don't fit into Outwit and Outplay. But in this case, we are looking at a social element, because I think there was one social cue that really... And it wasn't Q, sorry. I probably shouldn't use Q when I'm saying that. But there was this one moment that I think really struck out from a social standpoint. And that was Liz's conversation about, having managed and owned 4 companies, having sold 2, and Tevin's response of, I'm here for money. Like, doesn't sound like you need money.
Mm-hmm.
And how much the conversation around wealth in Survivor can really impact how willing people are to work with you.
Yeah, exactly. This is not my example, but I just started watching Survivor Philippines, and you have someone like Jeff Kent, you have someone like Lisa Welchel, that people are like, you don't need the money, and Lisa's just like, I was a child star.
Yeah.
Like, do you think that childhood money is still around? But it's crazy how just those dynamics of wealth you have to try and keep in your head, where she's just trying to share a genuine fact about herself and like something that she's very proud of, which she should be very proud of. But in Survivor, that anything can be used against you.
And I think that's the most important aspect of this conversation is Liz is just trying to have a conversation about what she does, right? And like, we've seen so many people who lie about their profession. I mean, Mitchell Bridwell here just says there's lying about your profession, then there's telling the truth about your profession, right? Mm-hmm. One of the biggest skills you can have in Survivor when it comes to lying is equivocation, right? Like that idea of telling half-truths. And the lie comes not from specifically telling false information, but from withholding the whole picture so that it's not all there. And because of that, sorry, I just saw Mitchell Bridwell's comment there about wealth being less when a woman takes it, because obviously Jeff Kent. But it's that conversation you're having. And I know Liz is clearly someone who is very proud of the accomplishments, and she should be, right? She should be proud of what she has accomplished in her life and everything. But you have to have that analysis of, how are people going to respond to this? And I don't think we have had a moment like this in Survivor for quite some time. We have not really seen people talk about how wealthy people are and how much it impacts the game, whether they're voting for them. Since what? I think the last time it became apparent in a season was David versus Goliath.
Yeah, like it's interesting because also, in 41 you have a pro athlete, but that doesn't get brought up really at all as something like, we should take them out because they have money. It was just, we should take them out because people like them.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing. And that's the interesting thing with the pro athlete aspect of it, right? The money doesn't play into it as much because they're threats on different levels most of the time.
That's true.
Whereas someone like Mike White, it was
social.
This guy he's a social player, like he can win, but he also is quite a successful Hollywood writer. And became even more successful after his stint on Survivor. But that's neither here nor there. These conversations don't happen. We've seen a lot of people talk about withholding their information before. I mean, probably one of the easiest examples for that is Russell not talking about all his oil money, right?
Let's go instead in South Pacific.
Yeah, go for that. But there are people often acknowledge this. And what we're seeing here with this Liz conversation is just that lack of connect with her tribe. And that's why it really falls into the social element of it. She's not evaluating what the people around her might think of that information. She could just say, hey, I've started up a couple of companies, right? Again, you can get into the details of what the companies are. Maybe don't get into the details that you've sold those companies, because that's where people are thinking about their money.
Yeah, exactly. So let's get into your example, John, because I think yours fits well with exactly what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm. I actually want to go back as far as possible. And I think when we're talking about these conversations about wealth and everything like that, it's more apparent in early Survivor because, again, it's more the social experiment at that point, and it's more that idea that people aren't sure how to approach the game aspect of Survivor. So instead, we have Carl, the dentist, who's like talking about his multiple vehicles and just how much money he has, and it really does rub people the wrong way to where he becomes the third boot on the season.
Hey, not before a quote unquote fire making challenge tiebreaker quiz show.
That's true. That is very true. But alas, it's one of those things that's really hard to balance in a show, and especially back then when you're pulling people from so many different walks of life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also like, okay, we're gonna go with Carl because he's part of the older people. Okay, why are we picking Carl? Well, I guess because he has the most money from the older people. So it's not necessarily that they wanted to specifically target Carl, but like because they were going after the old people alliance, that they went for Carl and his cars and his doctor money.
Yeah, exactly. And especially when you think about it, it's like you said earlier, right? Any excuse to vote someone off.
Mm-hmm.
Like, give people an excuse to vote you off. And that's what Carl did, because, again, I think Carl's proud of what he's accomplished, I would imagine. As like a dentist making a lot of money, a lot of people are proud of that type of thing. And it's kind of weird looking back at Africa at this point, as Mitchell Bridwell said in the comments, right? Like, this idea of like, this is a Gen X comment, is like they're commenting on Gen X in that
being the lazy group,
right? And like, we obviously have the generational battle season later on, but you kind of forget that when we're watching this season kind of boiled down to like boomers and Gen X. And I think there's always been a disconnect between generations about how a generation after them deals with finance and deals with what it means to be successful and have a lot of money. And I think it really is shown in this episode of Africa.
John, do you know where else people can hear specialists talk about Africa?
Would that be on the Patreon, where Every Seasons Matters just switched over to Africa this week?
Yeah, exactly. So go become a patron. There is so much goodness over on the Patreon, and it's daily content pretty much.
Yeah.
You're getting at least one podcast every single day. I'm pretty sure. Maybe there might be 2 off days, who knows? But
it's made up for the days where we have 2 podcasts in the same day instead.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm gonna go not too far in the future. We're gonna go to Thailand. Yes, I said Thailand. I have talked about Nicaragua. And now I'm talking about Thailand. What is my life? But I'm gonna talk about Brian and the Loved One tape, where Brian has been keeping his wealth under wraps, and he's just a used car salesman. He's not anything glamorous or fancy. And then his wife introduces him like, here's your grand piano, here's your caddy, here's your this, here's your that, and showing off like the entire house. And he's worried that people are going to get to thinking that he has all of this money when he really wants to win this game.
Yeah, that's I think a really interesting situation, because it wasn't Brian himself who brought it up, which is something we're not going to get in a new era version of Survivor, because we don't have loved ones visits anymore. So it's interesting because based on Brian's reaction to the video, it's very clear he's kind of just avoided the topic of wealth, which I think is the smart thing to do on Survivor.
Right.
Don't talk about money. I mean, it's kind of just like one of those things that, like, it's a taboo topic in the first place. Really great if you don't mention it when you're playing a social strategy game for $1 million.
Yeah.
But
because it could also work in the opposite way too, of like, I'm really poor, I need the money. Oh, they need money, they gotta go.
Yeah. This one is so interesting because Brian's wife is flaunting this wealth in this video. She is just like, everything is on display. It's like, look how big our house is. Look how big this grand piano is. Look how fancy your car is. It's so over the top. And it's so uncontrollable. So to see Brian then still be able to maneuver this game and win this season is actually kind of impressive, because this is a type of moment that I think if people were paying a little more attention to.
I mean, Helen did.
Yes, that is true.
She did, but she didn't have the agency to do anything about it.
Yeah, that's true. What else do you think about this moment? Like, is there a way to navigate this type of information coming out? Like, how do you prevent this information from tanking your game?
Jeffrey, you have given the option to people to stick around for these family videos or go back to camp. Brian never got that option to let people see his video. Jeff has given people the option, like, do you want people to stay? Or like, some people have spoken up being like, I want everybody to watch. Like, you know, Greg, when he won his video, he wanted everybody to like watch his family. Brian did not get that. Everyone, he was just like, all right, popping the tape in the TV. We're all watching Brian's video. And Brian's like, crap. Like, it could have been avoided if Brian was just either given the option or Jeff just sends them to camp. And then, you know, if Brian did it to himself, Brian does it to himself. But he doesn't. He gets that little teaser tape and probably is thinking, I don't want people to see this.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's the most interesting thing about that is, like, it's the early Survivor aspect of it too, right? Where this is a production mistake, essentially.
Yeah.
Now, lucky it didn't tank Brian's game, but it had the potential to. Especially because there's already been these conversations about wealth that have tanked people's games previously to this moment.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because it's something that can never happen in Survivor nowadays. But I don't know. Like, if someone mentions your wealth, I think you just try to change the subject as much as possible, right? But you have to do it in like such a subtle way, where it's not like drawing attention to the fact that you're changing the subject.
How much money do you make? Whoa, a bird?
Yeah, again, like, non-specifics are always better. Non-specifics are so much better for this because people believe non-specifics.
Yeah, exactly.
And just don't say you've sold 2 businesses. It scares people.
So that is our Outwit, Outplay, and Outlast moments. Leave a comment below. Let us know who had the better moments or which moments you liked better. Did we have one that you think fit better than what we put? Let us know. John, anything else? What's happening on the channel this week?
Oh, we have so much content coming out because we are popping out so much content. If you haven't already, check out Will and Blake. They did the premiere recap on Wednesday night. A lot of fun. Definitely worth a listen. Phil's after show is on the Patreon. We have so much stuff on the Patreon. We'll get to that afterwards, though, because first and foremost, we have Cassidy Clark coming to do the inaugural Power Rankings of season 46. First time Cassidy's been on the podcast. We're all very excited to have her. That'll be on Sunday afternoon. Monday, you'll Phil and Will are discussing Deal or No Deal Island and recapping the second episode. And Phil and I will be discussing Dune Part 2, which released in theaters today. And we're really excited to talk about that as the cinema specialists. Wednesday, of course, we will have episode 2 recap with Phil and Will. Will should be there this week. on Thursday. Phil and Will are, the finale of the Traders is next week. So Phil and Will will be talking about that. And
come right back here on Friday.
Yeah, and I almost forgot.
Again?
I know. Thursday will
man.
Also be mine and Phil's Oscar prediction podcast for the Cinema Specialist. So check that out. Oscars are looking a lot of fun this year, so should be a good show.
That schedule was a mouthful. So if you didn't understand anything of what just happened, subscribe, hit the bell, because then that turns on notifications, and then you can get notified every time we're live.
Yeah, and make sure you like the video. Thanks everyone for sticking around and giving it a listen, and sign up for the Patreon. McKenna and I talk the Game Changers premiere on there. It was a lot of fun revisiting that episode. I didn't know it would be that much fun, but it was a really interesting episode to dig our teeth into. Phil's after shows there, and also now's the chance. Like, the power rankings start next week, so $20 patrons get in on that. Sign up as a $20 patron. You have access to the every single show that we make. That is, yes. McKenna, I'm going to need help here. It's our rewind. It's Phil's after show. It's Every Season Matters. It's the casting perspective with Blake. It's I feel like I believe Will's New Era rewatch is still going on.
Yes, we have season 44. All right.
There you go. And
coming so soon. Coming soon. Celestina and I will be doing some Amazing Race Patreon content. We have last month, my friend Kyle and I talked showmances, romances, and hookups of Survivor. So there is so much content over on the Patreon, and if you sign up now, you'll have access to all the backlog content.
Yeah, but that's it for us this week. We will see you all next week, and hope you're enjoying season 46 so far. Let us know in the comments. Did I win or did McKenna win? And if you have a better Outwit, Outplay, or Outlast moment, tell us what it is.
Yeah, we want to know. All right, we'll see you next Friday.